True Crime Brewery contains disturbing content related to real-life crimes. Medical information is opinion based on facts of a crime and should not be interpreted as medical advice or treatment. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to True Crime Brewery. I'm Jill.
And I'm Dick.
Most of our TCB episodes deal with the intricacies of family, friend, or coworker relationships, where different personalities and vulnerabilities come together in one tragic act of murder. But what about the less common, but often more perplexing, cases of random killings? American serial killer Israel Keyes was arrested in 2012 in connection with the disappearance of Alaskan woman Samantha Koenig. Samantha was a young woman, much like our friends, our sisters, and our daughters, working at a coffee shop as a barista and enjoying time with her boyfriend and her friends. Needless to say, her disappearance was alarming and devastating to her community. But after Keyes' arrest down in Texas, the alarm and devastation spread to the lower United States, as interviews with Keyes revealed a lengthy history of crime, along with an unknown number of victims. Join us at the quiet end today for A Killer on the Road, the abduction of Samantha Koenig. It was Samantha's kidnapping which finally led to the capture of this very dangerous predator, ending over a decade of grisly crimes.
We have an Alaska beer. This one's called Citra Bitter Monk from Anchorage Brewing Company in Anchorage. Now this is a little bit different one. It's a Belgian IPA. All that means is that they use a different strain of yeast, which is quite tasty. This is a 9% ABV beer, so probably just one. You're not going to sit there and guzzle a bunch of them. Pretty gold color, a little bit of a haze, a big old white head that lingers forever. Nice aroma, sweet malt, some citrus, and grapes. And the taste was kind of biscuity, with grapefruit, grapes, and a little bit of tropical fruit noticed. Fairly complex mouthfeel, because it's a hoppy, malty, fruity beer, kind of all at the same time. Pretty good IPA. Congrats to Anchorage. They do some good beers up there.
Oh, I can't wait to try this one. Let's open it up.
Okay.
All right, Dick, join me down at the quiet end and start out this story. Really a scary one. The randomness of it.
It is. Random killings, random murders are just so scary because you don't have any defense. Right?
Well, right. You just never know.
You never know. In February of 2012, 18-year-old Samantha Koenig was working at the Common Grounds coffee shop. This was on Tudor Road, just outside of Anchorage. Now, these trailer-sized coffee stands have been popping up around the region, and they were proving quite popular. Samantha's stand was the third one owned by Michelle Robbins and her husband. Samantha hadn't been working there for very long, but she was a reliable employee, and she seemed to enjoy chatting with her customers. Now, at closing time, Samantha was in the shop by herself. She was expected to close up at 8 p.m., and her boyfriend Dwayne was going to pick her up and bring her home.
Yeah, Samantha and Dwayne had attended the same high school, and then she friended him on Facebook, and they eventually began dating. About 3 months into their relationship, Dwayne was invited to move in with Samantha, who lived with her dad, James Koenig. Dwayne had been thrown out of his parents' house for drinking, and Samantha had told her dad that if he didn't let Dwayne move in, she would move out. So James Koenig agreed with the condition that Dwayne help out around the house and that he stopped drinking. So the first month had been pretty awkward, but James had really warmed up to Dwayne and eventually became kind of like a second father to him. Dwayne was a good cook, he helped out around the house, and he'd landed a decent job as a chef at a local steakhouse. The steakhouse was less than 2 miles from Common Grounds where Samantha was working. And Samantha had been really excited to get the job at the coffee stand. Her friendly personality made her a favorite with the customers, and she quickly had like her own little following of people who came to get their coffee just to be able to say hi and chat with her.
Yeah, she was a fun person.
Very outgoing.
Yep. So Wednesday, February 2nd, Samantha's shift started just like any other day. She kept busy filling orders, stocking supplies, and cleaning up. Nearing the end of her shift, this was around 7 o'clock, her father had called her cell phone. He was checking on her, something he did every day, just checking in, how you doing. Samantha chatted with him, tried to sweet-talk him into bringing her dinner, but he was still working, so he couldn't do that.
Yeah, this James Koenig could be a really intimidating-looking man. He was stocky, with long hair, and he wore a leather biker's jacket. But Samantha was his only daughter, and he would really do anything for her. He was very protective of her. In fact, he had actually tried to discourage her from working in the coffee stand because she would be alone there in the evenings. But in the end, like with most things, Samantha got her own way.
So at 7:45 that evening, Dwayne asked his supervisor if he could leave long enough to pick up Samantha. Then he'd return to work. But the supervisor said, "Nah, you got to finish cleaning the kitchen first." So he was already 15 minutes late by the time he arrived at the coffee stand. So as he got out of his truck and walked up to the coffee stand, Dwayne saw that all the lights were out. Now this was strange because the lights were normally left on overnight. He peeked into the window of the stand, but he couldn't see Samantha. He called her cell phone repeatedly and texted a dozen times, but he got no answer or reply from her. So obviously he's worried about her. I mean, he's supposed to pick her up. Yes, he's 15 minutes late, but he gets there. Place is dark like it shouldn't be, and there's no sign of his girlfriend.
He was very worried.
So Dwayne called Samantha's father to let him know what was going on, and James told him don't worry too much. He figured that she would show up at home. She'd probably gotten a ride home from a friend. Dwayne went back to work and is still concerned, and as soon as he got off of work at 11:30, he rushed home. He was upset and nervous. James thought that Samantha could have been angry with Dwayne or just in a bad mood. So he's in bed. Dwayne's up. He can't sleep. He's so worried about Samantha.
Well, yeah, he thought when he got home from work she'd be there. But I guess James thought, well, maybe she was mad at Dwayne or something and she'd gone off with a friend. But Dwayne knew that everything had been fine and he couldn't understand it. Then hours later, Dwayne got a text from Samantha's phone. It read, "I'm going to my friend's house for a few days. Tell my dad I love him. You won't hear from me until I come home." So this was pretty freaky. I mean, for one thing, she's not going to tell Dwayne something she wants to tell her dad. She'd just text her dad. And she doesn't just go away for a few days and not talk to anyone. It just didn't make sense. So at this point, Dwayne is sure that something bad had happened. So between 3 and 4 in the morning, Dwayne heard a car door close out front of the house. He jumped up and went out onto the front porch, hoping that Samantha was home. But Dwayne saw a dark figure standing by his truck. It was a tall man dressed all in black pants, boots, shirt, even a black ski mask. And the guy was leaning into the driver's side of the truck. He stepped out of the truck and looked at Dwayne, and he was pretty scary. It was creepy. So Dwayne ran inside to get James. But by the time the two returned to the porch, the man was gone.
Huh, that is strange.
Yes.
So after he was unable to locate Samantha, James Koenig called the coffee stand owner, Michelle, on the morning of February 3rd. Michelle went on the internet to view the prior evening's video from the Common Ground security camera, and what she saw was upsetting, to say the least. The video showed an obviously frightened Samantha responding to a dark figure at the ordering window. So on the video, Samantha approached the window to take an order, and then she returned to the window a moment later with coffee, but immediately looked startled, which she hadn't, everything up to that point had been okay.
Right.
So she looks startled, she puts up her hands and backs away. She can then be seen turning off the lights, and then a man jumps in through the ordering window. And then Samantha was led away from the coffee stand, and the two people walked out of view of the camera.
Yes, and if you want to see that footage, it's easily available on YouTube if you just search her name. So the owner, Michelle Robbins, called the Anchorage Police Department to report what she'd seen on that footage. And the morning shift barista arrived at the coffee stand on February 3rd to find some cold cups of coffee on the counter and Samantha's belongings in her personal storage box. Samantha had also left a note that she'd written earlier that evening asking if she was needed to work the following Saturday. So that day, Anchorage police announced that they believed Samantha had been abducted at gunpoint from the coffee stand. Her abductor was described as being taller than Samantha and wearing dark clothing. Since Samantha's abduction, it had snowed, so this had potentially covered up crucial evidence at the crime scene. 24 detectives were put on this case along with regular patrol officers, because they have this footage, so they know for sure something's wrong. There's no question that she went off by her own or anything.
No, she was abducted.
Yes.
So Samantha's father was at the Common Grounds parking lot. He had dozens of volunteers ready to help look for Samantha. And her father passed out missing persons flyers. They were donated by Kinko's and the University of Alaska. There were over 7,000 flyers that were passed out.
The community really did come together to help James out. I mean, Samantha was everything to him. He had grown up in a blue-collar family in Anchorage. He was the son of a plumber and a bus driver, and he worked as a cook at an Indian restaurant about 15 miles outside of Anchorage. James met Samantha's mother when he was working at the restaurant, and Samantha was born before they got married in 1993. So when James and Samantha's mother divorced, James got sole custody, and he had raised her as a single parent for most of her life. So they had a very, very close relationship.
Yeah, so he was awarded sole custody because of problems the mother was having? Or was that a mutual decision? Or we
Not
just don't
sure,
know?
but usually that means that the mother was either not good or not interested, right?
Right. So as Samantha grew up, she and her father were best friends. They spent a lot of time together. Samantha was definitely a tomboy. She liked to go camping. She liked to go four-wheeling. They shared a love of Will Ferrell movies and animals. She had a dog named Sheba, who she raised from a puppy. And one of her dreams was to have a farm of her own with plenty of animals running around.
Yeah, or even maybe to be a veterinarian.
Those are good goals.
They are. So as you can imagine, after Samantha's disappearance, James couldn't sleep. As his neighbors and friends held vigils and posted flyers, the police continued to investigate. A few days after Samantha's abduction, the police got surveillance footage from a nearby Home Depot's security camera. And this video, recorded from hundreds of feet from the coffee stand, showed Samantha and her abductor walking to a white pickup truck in the parking lot. And this footage was not released to the public. It was felt to be unnecessary and just upsetting for people who knew her. So unfortunately, a search of the trucks matching the profile of the truck in the parking lot, though, had brought up over 3,000 possibilities in the area. So APB investigators would spend 6 weeks trying to track everyone down who owned a similar truck.
So within a week, a mobile home was donated to help with the search for Samantha. It was parked near the Common Grounds coffee stand, and it was used as a 24-hour operations base for James Koenig and volunteers who were working to find Samantha and bring her home. In fact, James would live in that motorhome for almost a month, answering over 10,000 calls with leads. And every lead raised his hopes, but they were all dead ends. No sign of Samantha.
No, her family created a Facebook page dedicated to finding her as well, and the page brought in numerous leads, but it really only led to rumors and false information being spread. I mean, of course, this was done with the best of intentions, but it was really thought to have wasted the police resources. Donations came in, and a reward was offered for $60,000 for any information leading to her return. But unfortunately, this changed nothing.
Then on February 24th, which was about 2.5 weeks after she had disappeared, after her abduction, Samantha's boyfriend, Dwayne, received a text from Samantha's cell phone. And the text said, "Connor Park sign under pic of Albert, ain't she purty?"
Right, so Dwayne and James hurried to Connors Park, which was just 5 miles from downtown Anchorage. And when you enter the park, you see the bulletin board. And tacked on the board, they saw a plastic bag behind a missing dog poster for Albert, a golden doodle, I believe. And inside the plastic bag, there was a ransom note and a photo of Samantha. So they were careful not to touch the bag's contents, and they called the police and waited for them to arrive. After analyzing the note, detectives called James Koenig into the station, and the typed-up note was demanding $30,000. The photo of Samantha was pretty disturbing. It was of her sprawled out nude on a mattress, and there was a copy of the February 13th Anchorage Daily News lying beside her. So the note demanded that $30,000 be deposited into Samantha's bank account so that it could be withdrawn over the next several days from ATMs outside of Alaska. And the note also said that Samantha had been moved out of the state. The photo was creepy and weird. It was a blurred photo, looked like it was blurred on purpose. Samantha's hair looked like it was greasy or wet. The color of her skin was very off. Her hair was braided, which is not a style Samantha ever wore. But still the photo gave James Koenig some hope. Maybe his daughter was still alive. But 2 months would pass between the time of her abduction until the time that she was found.
So the police did deposit money into Samantha's account. And on February 29th, which was 5 days after the ransom note had been sent, Samantha's abductor used her debit card to check if the money had been deposited. He then went to the Alaska USA Bank ATM and tried to withdraw $600. Now this was denied because there was a $500 per day limit. So then he went to the Denali Alaskan Federal Credit Union and withdrew $500 just before midnight. In the video, he was with gloves, glasses, and a mask, so he's pretty unidentifiable. Then less than an hour later, now it's after midnight, he withdrew another $500 from another ATM. So law enforcement, who was working the case, staked out all the ATMs in the Anchorage area. And as they monitored the transactions electronically nationwide, investigators would be notified within minutes of Samantha's card being used. And this worked, except by the time the police would arrive, the person was gone. So video footage from a bank's wide-angle camera did catch the blurry image of a white car driving away from one of the locations after making a withdrawal. Now this was in Las Vegas, so we're already a few hundred miles, several hundred miles away from Anchorage.
It was pretty shocking that the person had gotten so far away so fast.
No kidding.
That was unexpected. So the FBI had to be involved in this, and FBI analysts were able to identify the white car as a 2012 Ford Focus. On March 7th, there was a withdrawal made in Arizona. Another was made in New Mexico on March 8th. Then on March 9th at around 11:30 p.m., Samantha's abductor withdrew $480 from an ATM at a Houston community bank in a town in the city of Humble, Texas. The FBI issued an alert to Texas law enforcement to be on the lookout then for a 2012 white Ford Focus. 2 days later, March 11th, another withdrawal of $480 was made from Samantha's account in Shepherd, Texas. This is between Houston and Lufkin, just about midway between those two cities. At 7:30 a.m. on March 13th, a Texas Highway Patrol officer drove through the Quality Inn parking lot near Lufkin. He'd received the bolo about the white Ford Focus, and he'd been out looking for it. A database search of the license plate of the Focus parked at the Quality Inn showed that it was a rental car. And after checking with the front desk of the hotel, he learned that room 215 had been rented by a man, and this man was named Israel Keys.
I would just want to say that this highway patrol guy must have been pretty amazing. You're just sort of randomly driving around looking for this car, and he finds it.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
It is.
I mean, it shows some dedication, I think.
Someone actually pays attention to the messages coming into his car.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
But yeah, I'm amazed.
And it's not that unusual of a car either. It's a pretty common rental car. In fact, Keys ended up with 2 of the same color and year, which kind of messed him up.
Yep.
But FBI agents were notified, and the hotel was watched by several law enforcement officers. At 11:30 a.m., they watched Keys walk into the parking lot and drive away in the Focus. He was followed, of course, and they pulled him over for driving 3 miles over the speed limit. So Keys matched the description of Samantha's abductor, and also a big thing was that he had an Alaska driver's license. So that makes it, pretty sure this was the guy. Not a lot of people with Alaskan driver's licenses down in Texas.
Probably not.
Now, Keyes was polite as he was asked questions, but he became less cooperative and ended up refusing to have his car searched.
Okay, let's take a short break for our sponsors now, and when we come back, we'll learn more about Samantha's abductor.
So who was Israel Keyes, besides this monster who took Samantha from that coffee stand on February 2nd, 2012? Keyes was born in 1978 in Richmond, Utah, a small town of only about 2,000 people. He was the second of 9 children and the firstborn son. While he was still a young boy, the family moved to Colville, Washington. This town was still small, but it was about twice as populated as Richmond. The family lived a very simple life in a small cabin that was heated by a wood stove. There was no electricity. In Colville, they joined and were very involved in the Ark, a Christian church which is quite well known for its racist and very anti-Semitic views. And during this time, the Keyes family was friends and neighbors with the Kehoe family. Israel Keyes was childhood friends of Chevy and Shane Kehoe, known racists who were later convicted of the 1996 murder of gun dealer William Muller, his wife Nancy, and her 8-year-old daughter Sarah.
So they're nice guys, in other words.
Well, it's just interesting that these people grew up together, right? What are the odds?
I know.
In the late 1990s, the Keyes family moved to Smyrna, Maine, where they produced maple syrup and attended Amish church services. Then, after Keyes' mother lost interest in converting to Amish, they were Mormon for a while. The children weren't allowed to watch movies or listen to any contemporary music.
You know, as he got older and when he became a teenager, Keyes rejected his parents' religion, and he announced to them that he was an atheist. So they responded by throwing him out of the house, and he became ostracized from his family, or shunned, if you want to do the Mormon version.
Yeah.
No, the
Amish version.
The Amish version.
Sure. Well, his mom went from religion to religion, but she was very strict and devout with all of them. Some really kind of radical views. But Israel Keyes was talented at carpentry and found work easily for a general contractor. In 1998, he moved out on his own to New Jersey, and when he was 20 years old, he joined the Army. He served at Fort Lewis, Fort Hood, and for a while in Egypt, and he was honorably discharged in 2000. But Keyes had committed many crimes before he even joined the military. He would later admit to raping a young girl in Oregon between 1996 and 1998. He told FBI agents that he had separated this girl from her friends and raped her, and he had planned on killing her, but he hadn't gone through with it. But before he was discharged from the Army, Keyes met a woman named Tammy Hawkins. He had purchased a personal ad looking to meet women, and Tammy lived a little less than 10 miles from where he was stationed at Fort Lewis. After writing back and forth, they spoke on the phone, finally meeting in person in December at a Mexican restaurant in Tacoma. After getting to know Keyes, who went by Iz, Tammy decided she really liked him. She thought that he was intelligent, and they had some similar childhood things which they could talk about. One of them was being really turned off to organized religion because of the way they were raised. But Tammy would describe their first 2 months together as a 2-month drinking one-night stand. They both liked to get drunk. And a few weeks after that, Tammy called Keyes to tell him that she was pregnant. At that point, he asked her to get an abortion, but she refused to. So they agreed to break up, and she told him that she would care for the child on her own, and he was off the hook. But in July of 2001, Keyes called Tammy and asked to get together. And when they met, he confessed to her that he was engaged to someone else. But he said he had changed his mind, and he wanted to be with Tammy and raise the baby with her.
Yeah, so Tammy and Israel moved into a rental house on the Makah Indian Reservation, and that's where Tammy had grown up. Now, this was right across the street from Tammy's sister's house. The house was in pretty bad shape, but Israel was able to fix it up nicely for them. Tammy had an 8-year-old son from her previous marriage, and Tammy would later say that Keyes was a good role model for her son. Now, in 2001 and 2002, Tammy traveled every 3 months for up to 5 days for her job. She wasn't a possessive person, and she didn't keep track of what Israel did while she was away. A couple of times, though, he said to her that he was a bad person and he had a black heart. She didn't ask what that meant. She just assumed it was the alcohol talking.
Yeah, they were heavy drinkers.
They were. She did notice that her husband was playing online poker with a screen name Blackheart. He also began listening to heavy metal music exclusively, and then he had a pentagram tattooed on the back of his neck.
Now that would be worrisome.
To me it would be.
If you came home one day with a pentagram on the back of your neck, I'd say, Dick, what's up? Something's different. You know, it could be alarming.
It could be. And anywhere on your body, not just on your neck.
That's true. So Israel Keyes, or Iz, as Tammy called him, totally avoided talking about his parents and his childhood. His mother had seemed to use religion almost as a weapon, quoting the Bible and really judging Tammy on the few occasions when she did speak with her. But Tammy gave birth to their daughter Sarah in 2002, and Tammy was excited to have a daughter, and Iz really seemed to enjoy being a father. Sarah had asthma and RSV as a baby, but Israel was very anti-medicine and anti-immunization. So he and Tammy did have many disagreements on how to treat their daughter and how to take care of her. While Sarah was still really young, Tammy had been diagnosed with uterine fibroids, so she had chronic pain and ended up having a hysterectomy. But then she became addicted to pain medication. And remember, she's already an alcoholic. So as her addiction worsened, Keyes became the primary caretaker for his daughter. And during this time, he took a job with the Maka tribe's Parks and Recreation Department. He picked up litter, he built trails and restrooms, and even created a farmer's market, so he was really well liked. People were happy about it. And this was a full-time job that paid quite well. So he kept that job for about 5 years. But Keyes' relationship with Tammy really began to fall apart in 2004. She was very deep into her addiction, and he was becoming more and more distant and really very cold. He was sleeping on the couch by this time, and then after dating some other women, he met a 41-year-old nurse practitioner who was living in Port Angeles. He separated from Tammy then and decided to move with this nurse practitioner, Kimberly, for a new job that she was offered in Alaska. So he's going to go to Alaska with this new woman.
That's the plan. Now, the court initially denied Keyes' relocation request for Sarah. But eventually Tammy agreed to share custody, and the arrangement was that Sarah would alternate which parents she lived with on a yearly rotation.
So I don't think I've ever heard of that kind of a custody agreement. That doesn't sound very easy for the child to move every year.
So a year here, then a year there, then a year back again.
Yeah, I don't like that.
Wow.
I think that would be really tough.
In March of 2007, Keyes started his own business, Keyes Construction, in Anchorage. On the website for his construction business, he advertised for projects, including cedar fences, wood decks, and bathroom and kitchen remodeling. There were plenty of photos of finished projects on the site. Keyes and Kimberly Anderson moved into a 2,000-square-foot, 3-bedroom home, and Keyes remodeled it. Then he built a 120-square-foot storage shed at the end of the driveway on the side of the house. So it looks like, he's married, divorced, he has a child, he's with a new woman, they're settling in. Sounds pretty good.
Well, the thing is, Dick, people who he worked for and worked with thought he was a really high-quality person.
Yeah.
He was reliable, he seemed honest, he was hardworking, he would work right through lunch, one of his coworkers said. He just seemed to give off this persona of being a really hardworking, serious, honest person. A father, a husband, or a boyfriend, whatever you want to say there. But it's just stunning what people thought of him and who he really was.
Who he was, yeah. I mean, it's an amazing facade.
Yes, really more than any I've seen before.
Yeah, and just the lengths he went to, just amazing.
Yeah, he was intelligent, that's for sure.
So even though he was living this apparently normal, productive life, in reality he was living a life of crime and violence. In April of 2009, he traveled to the small town of Tupper Lake, New York. And in Tupper Lake, he robbed a bank. He had on gloves, sunglasses, blue jeans, and a paste-on mustache and goatee. He showed a bank teller his Smith & Wesson gun, demanded money, and ordered everyone in the bank to lie on the floor. And he got away with just over $10,000.
Now, according to the FBI, this is very unusual. Most bank robbers will go up to a teller and get some money out of the cash drawer. But to take over a bank single-handedly is very unusual. Very risky thing to do, and for some reason he got away with it. So it's pretty shocking, really.
Well, you're going to find other things that are shocking and amazing.
Well, true. So the day after this bank robbery, Keyes checked into the Handy Suites Hotel in Essex, Vermont. He walked about a half mile into the Woodside Natural Area. This was known locally as 68 acres. And he buried a large orange 5-gallon Home Depot bucket, and it contained items for abducting and killing people, including the gun he had used in the bank robbery. Then 4 days later, he hopped on a plane and he returned to Alaska. So he was leaving this there for future crimes, planning ahead.
He was. And there's more than one of these places.
Yeah, this was the pattern. Absolutely.
I wonder, though, he's been gone from Alaska for a while. What's his wife say, or his girlfriend? Where you been, Izzy?
Well, he said that he always would have some kind of business trip or something that it would coincide with. So he was pretty sneaky about it.
Well, and he did get away with it. He must have been convincing somehow.
Very convincing. Nobody questioned him really at all. From anything I've read or seen, no one in his personal life thought that he was capable of what he was doing.
Yeah, and in later interviews, according to Keyes, his usual routine was to fly to an area of the country, rent a car, drive hundreds of miles to find a victim. Then he would put together and bury murder kits somewhere in the targeted area, stashing things like shovels, plastic bags, money, weapons, ammo, and even containers of Drano to help him dispose of the bodies.
Yeah, and he would look for victims randomly, mostly in remote areas like parks, campgrounds, or hiking trails. When he did target someone's home, he looked for a house with an attached garage, no car in the driveway, and no sign of children or dogs. Now, I don't think he really had particular empathy for children, but he did see them more as a complication. And he said that after having a child of his own, he didn't want to deal with that.
So that's a little bit about Israel Keyes' background. Back to 2012, he's been pulled over for driving over the speed limit.
Right, he's in Texas.
And he's arrested for credit card fraud. And at this point, his rental car is searched. So in the trunk of the Ford Focus, the rental car, the police found clothing that matched the description of the clothing of the person who had been using the ATMs. They also found a gun, a roll of dye-stained bills from a bank robbery, a mask, and more importantly, Samantha's cell phone and Samantha's credit card. Bingo.
Exactly. So he was sent back to Alaska, and when he was taken to court to be indicted, he made an escape attempt. He actually got his feet out of his shackles and leapt over the table next to his defense attorney. This was pretty shocking. This was something no one had really seen before. He was quickly taken down by several officers, and they actually tasered him several times. Before the news of his arrest was announced publicly, a detective called Samantha's father, James Koenig, to let him know. Keyes' home in Anchorage was searched as well, and also a trailer that he used for his business. Police found a Burlington, Vermont newspaper article about the disappearance of a married couple from Vermont, Bill and Lorraine Currier, and that was on Keyes' computer, and this was an unsolved disappearance. The Curriers had disappeared from their house in June of 2011, so just about half a year before Samantha had been abducted. This couple lived in the small town of Essex, Vermont, where they both worked full-time and were pretty involved in their community. At 10 a.m. on a weekday, Diana Smith called the Essex Police Department to report that her 49-year-old brother Bill and his 55-year-old wife Lorraine had failed to show up for their jobs that morning. Diane actually worked with Lorraine in Burlington, and when she learned that Lorraine had not showed up or called into work, she was really concerned. So then she called Bill's employer, and when she heard that Bill hadn't showed up or called that morning either, she was very worried. Then she called the Currier's house but got no answer, and she drove out to their house, and no one answered the door. So the day before this, Lorraine and Bill had worked their normal shifts at their jobs. They had last been seen by neighbors that evening at their house. Bill had been seen in the side yard working on his gutters at about 6 p.m. Lorraine was sitting in her backyard smoking a cigarette at about 6:30. Investigators later determined that Bill had been online browsing sports and Facebook web pages until about 8 p.m. So police went to the courier's house after hearing from Bill's sister to do a welfare check, and they found all of the doors were locked, but all of the window shades were pulled down also, and that wasn't normal. Looking into their attached garage, an officer saw that the glass of the door leading from the garage to the kitchen had been smashed. It had all been broken. And the way it was set up, if you broke that window, you could reach in and undo the deadbolt.
And gain entrance.
Yes.
So when they were in the kitchen, officers saw shards of glass on the floor, but there didn't appear to be any obvious signs of a robbery or of a struggle. Bill's wallet and Lorraine's purse were still there. The police did see that the phone lines had been cut. Now, this is a pretty quiet, low-crime area, and the courier's disappearance really frightened the neighbors.
This was a terrifying thing. You don't expect this.
Doesn't happen in small-town Essex. Now, one neighbor told police that her dog had acted strangely at around 7 p.m., whining and running to the door. Everyone who knew the couriers described them as a quiet couple who had frequent family gatherings at their house, and they had recently celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary.
But two neighbors told police that they had heard what sounded like a gunshot around 9:30 p.m. on June 8th. Of course, nobody called or did anything. But a few days later, Essex police found the courier's car. It had been abandoned next to a dumpster in an apartment building parking lot, and that was just 5 miles from their house. A piece of the broken glass from the kitchen door was found in the passenger side floor mat. So the couriers apparently had been taken from their home in their own car. They found no activity in the courier's bank accounts, on their credit cards, nothing on their cell phones or their email. They had just vanished. Surveillance from the local Rite Aid showed that Lorraine shopped there the day before, just before 4 p.m. So by June 13th, there was a very large organized search for the couriers. Over 30 officers from the Essex PD, Vermont State PD, and the county sheriff's office searched a 1-mile radius around their house. And searches were also done of nearby wooded areas. The FBI was called in to assist, and they determined, based on the couriers' backgrounds and activities, that they really had a low to moderate risk of becoming victims of violent crime. The profile of their abductor was of a white male, acting alone, using a firearm. But they believed that at least one of the couple was a targeted victim. They didn't think this could be random. But they were wrong about that. The couriers really had been chosen at random, just based on the appearance and the location of their home. So this is basically unheard of. Couples were not randomly taken from their homes by a stranger. Just really never happened.
Very rare.
Yes.
Now back to his arrest in Texas. After he was taken to the police station, Keyes denied having anything to do with Samantha's abduction. He requested a lawyer and wouldn't talk to detectives. But he did learn pretty quickly that the police had a lot of evidence. They had searched Keyes' house, and they were able to match his truck to the video surveillance outside the coffee stand. And they showed Keyes their evidence, hoping to get him to cooperate with them. Now, he didn't say anything in this first meeting, but then a few hours later, his defense attorney called detectives and said Keyes was ready to tell them what had happened to Samantha. He was willing to give a full confession, but first he wanted to smoke a cigar, and he wanted a peanut butter Snickers bar and an Americano coffee. He was just cold and emotionless, although he often laughed or made jokes.
So this has got to be so tough to be a detective and do this, right?
So they probably wanted to lean across the table and beat the shit out of him.
Absolutely, but they really had to kind of befriend him and be, kind of smiling with him and talking to him to get him to open up. So to me, that's just got to be so tough to do. I don't know if I'd have it in me.
Be difficult, wouldn't it?
They should be actors, right? I mean, that's a gift.
Yeah.
That's not easy to do. especially when you have to, buy him a candy bar and things like that. Be really hard. I don't know if I'd be capable of it. So I do give the detectives a lot of credit here for being able to do that. I mean, really for the greater good, the better purpose of finding out some information for the families of his victims.
Right. Keyes gave detectives specific details of what he had done to Samantha. And in fact, much of it is so graphic and upsetting that some of the confession tapes have not been released to the public. Keyes had staked out the coffee stand location a few days before Samantha's abduction. He had chosen common grounds because it stayed open later than other stands in the region. The stand was only 8 by 12 feet, and usually only one person at a time worked there.
Yeah, and usually a young woman.
So on the night he took Samantha, Keyes parked his truck near the Home Depot lot and walked toward the coffee stand. He didn't have definite plans other than robbing the shop, but he did have kidnapping, rape, and murder as possibilities in his mind.
Yeah, so he had really kind of upped things a notch in doing this near to his home, right? He lived in Anchorage. So before this, he had flown and driven far away to commit these crimes. But he was doing this pretty much in his hometown.
His backyard, basically.
Yeah, and he would admit to feeling kind of an invincibility, which we've heard before as these crimes get ramped up. Sometimes the offender will get that way, almost like they're losing control. They're not as controlled because he had been very controlled in how he did these awful crimes. So he was holding a .22 Taurus handgun, and he was keeping it hidden in his jacket pocket as he approached the coffee stand. It was snowing, and through the coffee shop window he saw Samantha, this young, attractive girl. She was alone and cleaning up, getting ready to close for the night. So Keyes walked up to the window and ordered an Americano. This was at 7:55 p.m. Samantha prepared the coffee for him, and then she turned back to the window. And that's when he pointed the gun at her and told her this was a robbery. He told her to turn off the lights, and she obeyed him. Now, she must have been really shocked or just in a state of panic, because she didn't think of pushing the panic button, which was actually within her reach near the light switch.
Wow.
Yeah, isn't that heartbreaking? So Keyes said he noticed someone sitting in a car at a car dealership across the street who was smoking a cigarette and actually watching him at the coffee stand. But he stayed calm and pretended to be chatting with Samantha, told her to act like she knew him, and he was able to do that until the car drove away, apparently. Then Keyes lifted himself up and jumped through the window, and he forced Samantha to her knees and bound her hands behind her back with plastic zip ties. So it's really unimaginable what this girl went through, and just horrible.
According to Keyes, Samantha told him that her father would be there any minute to pick her up. She also told him there were security cameras and that there was an alarm that would go off whenever she opened the cash drawer.
Now, that was pretty smart of her. I think most robbers would have left. But she didn't know who she was dealing with, a real monster, and he just ignored this.
Yep. Keyes expected her to have had a car that he could take her in. So it turns out he's breaking two of his own rules. Never hunt near his home and never use his own vehicle. Using his own truck increases chances of being caught. But as you said, Jill, he probably was feeling pretty powerful and unstoppable when he was victimizing Samantha.
Yeah, I guess, Samantha was really listening to him and trying to just go along and get out of this, which is something that a lot of us are taught to do. I know when my mom worked at a bank, she was taught just let them get the money, don't argue or anything, and they'll leave. So I think that's what Samantha was thinking.
Yeah, she just didn't know what she was dealing with.
No, there's no way she could have known, and in a way it's better that she didn't. Although it's heartbreaking because she may have been able to get someone's attention if she knew how seriously her life was in peril. So she was really complying with his demands, hoping he would leave, but he had already decided that he was going to take her. He stuffed some napkins in her mouth to gag her and walked out of the stand, holding her close to him and keeping the gun on her. He told her to act like she was his girlfriend who'd had too much to drink, and she went along with it. And it's too bad because there were some other people as they walked away that she probably could have screamed and had some kind of chance.
So about 200 yards away from the coffee stand, Samantha tried to escape. She got away for a few steps, but then stumbled in a puddle of melt. And Keyes grabbed her from behind, pushed the gun into her ribs, and said he's going to kill her. So he put her in the passenger seat of his truck. He asked if she had a debit card, and Samantha told him she did, but she shared it with her boyfriend. And it was in his truck, which was parked outside of her house. And her cell phone was still on the coffee stand. So Keyes told her he was going to hold her for ransom. Samantha seemed relieved by this because she knew her dad would do anything to have her home safely. Plus, she's going to live, she's thinking.
So sad. I mean, this was a total lie. He had no intention of letting her go. He drove around with her for a while and pulled over at one point to move her to the back and restrain her more. He had a police scanner, so he knew that no calls had come in about the Common Grounds coffee stand. So he knew he still had time to do plenty of things. He parked at a nearby Walmart and walked back to the stand to get Samantha's cell phone, because he decided he was going to use the phone to send a ransom note.
And by the time he got to the coffee stand, Samantha's boyfriend Dwayne had already been there, and he's come and gone. So Keyes found Samantha's cell phone and keys on the counter. As he's leaving, her cell phone rang. Now almost 11 o'clock, so it's either her boyfriend or her father trying to get a hold of her.
Yeah.
Now when he got back to his truck, Samantha had not moved from where he had left her. Once in the driver's seat, he sent the text to her boyfriend then, saying that she would be gone for a few days. That's the one that aroused his suspicions.
Yeah, saying, tell my dad I'll be gone for a few days. You won't hear from me.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Keyes was driving Samantha back to his home. He planned to hold her in his shed. And on the way there, he stopped to let her pee, and he did stop to put some gas in his truck as well. Once at his house on Spur Lane that he shared with his girlfriend and his daughter, he backed his truck into the driveway. As he prepared the truck and shed to move Samantha from one to the other, several neighbors were walking by walking their dogs. Also, Keyes' girlfriend is still awake in the house. But he brought Samantha into his shed, blindfolded, and was going to keep her there. I just can't imagine. He's got a girlfriend and a daughter yards away in the house.
Just right there.
Yeah. Now, he definitely thought of a similar scenario because he had prepared the shed. The floor was covered with a tarp, and he had 2 space heaters on. To immobilize Samantha, he tied a noose around her neck with rope, and he had that attached to the wall with large screws. Her hands were bound as well, and he told her he had errands to do, but she'd better be quiet. Then he turned on the radio so loud that no one would be able to hear her if she did try and scream in the shed. Keyes asked Samantha for her address. Then he went into his house, got directions on MapQuest, and printed them out. He took the map back to Samantha and had her point out exactly where her boyfriend's truck would be parked. And then he left her in the shed, taking his girlfriend's car. So it was after 2 a.m. when he got to Samantha's house, and he parked 3 blocks away and walked, dressed entirely in black. He used Samantha's keys to open the truck door and found her wallet behind the passenger side visor. He took Samantha's driver's license and debit card. And this is when Dwayne had heard the door and come out onto the porch. He heard the front door of Samantha's house open, and he saw Dwayne standing on the front porch looking at him. And Dwayne actually yelled, "Can I help you with something?" But then he went back in the house to get James because he was creeped out. He was afraid. And Keyes took off. He ran down the street and hid behind a snowbank. So when James and Dwayne came back out on the porch, he was gone. When Keyes was sure that no one was coming after him, he went back to his girlfriend's car and went back to his house. Once at his house, he went inside. His girlfriend was sound asleep. He took a moment to have a glass of wine. Then he put a headlamp on and returned to the shed to terrorize poor Samantha.
But when he went into the shed, he noticed that Samantha looked like she had just been sitting there waiting for him. It didn't look like she'd made any attempt to escape. Apparently, she believed that she was being held for ransom, and he was eventually planning to let her go. Keyes drank some wine, smoked a cigar. He told Samantha, everything will be okay.
Yeah, so Samantha asked him if he'd been able to get a hold of her dad, but then Keyes just brutally abused and raped her in the shed. After that, he strangled her, he stabbed her, and he hung her up by her neck from a shelf. Remember, his girlfriend and daughter are asleep in the house, and he returned to the house and took a shower, like no big deal. And that morning, he went along with his normal daily activities. He woke his daughter, fed his dogs, made coffee. He already had a cruise planned and a flight to catch that day from Houston to New Orleans, where he would begin his family vacation. And the cruise kind of turned out to be a convenient reason for him to leave town after abducting Samantha. After packing his bags, he went out to the shed and untied the rope that was on Samantha. He wrapped a tarp around her body and put her into some lower cabinets on the interior shed wall. He arranged her so if someone did open the cabinets, they would only see the tarp. Then he double-locked the doors, went into the house, and called a cab to go to the airport. Just, simple as that. And I guess he felt like the cold weather would preserve her body, so he had plenty of time to take his trip and come back. And that's what he did. He went on a family cruise.
Amazing.
It's just horrible. So he's back, and on Monday, February 19th, his daughter returned to school. So he finally had some time to take care of Samantha's body. He had to dismantle the cabinets to get her frozen body out, and blood had leaked all over the cabinet floor. He tore it up and burnt it in his fireplace. Then he cleaned the shed with hot water and bleach. Once it had dried, he put a large piece of hard plastic on the floor, and he constructed a wooden table. Now, this is horrible. I'm not going to give too many details, but I feel like I have to say what he did. He thawed out Samantha's body, put her on the table, and then he had sex with her corpse, according to what he told detectives. And it was that afternoon that he had bought a Polaroid camera. He'd bought it at Target, and then to get film for it, he drove to a different Target store in Wasilla. He did that right after he tucked his daughter into bed. So the next day, his girlfriend was returning from a trip, and he picked her up at the airport. And it was the day after that when he went to Walmart and bought women's makeup. He also bought fishing line and sewing needles. And he picked up a newspaper from February 13th. And this is all so he can have that Ransom photo that he hung up under the missing dog poster. He used the makeup to try and make Samantha look like she was still alive. Spent hours putting on makeup, sewed her eyes and lips, arranged her body, braided her hair. He knew how to braid hair because he braided his daughter's hair a lot. And after several attempts, he took a picture of Samantha with the newspaper beside her. Just shocking. Very disturbing.
Just horrendous.
It is horrendous. He used a typewriter that he bought at the Salvation Army thrift store and typed up the ransom note, wearing gloves so he wouldn't leave fingerprints. And this is when he asked for $30,000 to be deposited in Samantha's account. When he was finished with the note and he had the photo, he put them both inside 2 Ziploc bags. Then, on February 24th, Keyes got up early and drove his girlfriend's car to Connors Park. He hid the note behind the missing dog flyer. And after that, he returned home and spent the rest of the day with his girlfriend. That night, she actually had a girls' night out with her friends, and Keyes was in a good mood and helped out. He acted as their designated driver.
Such a sweetheart.
To be able to be 2 different people like that, it's such a scary person.
Yeah.
Just no heart, no feelings.
Now, after his car tracks were concealed by other traffic, and he had thrown away his shoes, Keyes parked behind a grocery store, put the battery back in Samantha's phone, and sent the text to Dwayne. The text had said, "Connor Park, sign under pic of Albert, ain't she purty?" So after the text went through, he removed the battery again and drove back home.
Yeah, he always removed the battery from his phone when he went and did these crimes, too. He did know.
So a few hours later, Keyes drove back to the park to see if the note had been found. And he saw a crime scene van and patrol cars at the park.
Yeah, that actually gave him a little thrill to see that. He was happy with himself. This guy had no empathy and no conscience.
No, I also began to notice that the body in his shed was decomposing, and it was smelling bad. So he took apart the table he had built in the shed and burned the wood in this fireplace. Then he covered the floor and walls of the shed with polyethylene sheeting. And using wire as a tourniquet, along with a handheld utility knife and a sawzall, he cut up Samantha's body. So when this just absolutely ghastly task was completed, he put the body parts in 55-gallon plastic garbage bags, triple bagged them, left them in the shed for several days as he went about his normal routines.
Yeah, and while this was going on, the Anchorage community is offering support and sympathy to Samantha's family and friends. They held a benefit concert where several bands performed to add to Samantha's reward money. They even called the event Sam Stock because Samantha went by Sam. And the reward got up to over $70,000.
So Keyes was planning to permanently dispose of Samantha's remains in a place where no one would find them. So he went to Walmart, bought some fishing line, hooks, lures, and other ice fishing supplies. He searched Google Maps for a deep lake and settled on Matanuska Lake as the location to dispose of Samantha's remains. He drove the 35 miles north to the lake and found the parking lot near Glen Highway completely empty. He walked out onto the frozen lake, pulling a sled with a tote filled with ice fishing equipment. So he decided on a spot about 500 yards out, unloaded supplies, and built kind of a rudimentary shack on the ice. He used a chainsaw to cut an 8x8 foot square in the ice. Then he used a 100-foot length of twine with weights on it to measure the depth of the water. It was 40 feet deep.
There weren't many people around, but Keyes did notice one fisherman watching him, so he decided to call it a day and come back. He deconstructed the shack, covered the hole with plywood, with plans to return the next day. And the next day he did return to the site, and he brought with him Samantha's head, arms, and legs in bags. He reassembled the shack and put her remains in the water, wrapped in plastic bags and weighed down with heavy fishing weights. Afterwards, he started a fire and actually decided to do some fishing. He would tell detectives later that he had caught some fish that day and brought them home to his family for dinner. A warped individual. He disposed of Samantha's torso in the same way the next day, and this time he refilled the hole with ice and covered it with snow. He returned home and he burned many of the tools and supplies. On March 1st, he towed a trailer with over 400 pounds of potential evidence to the Anchorage landfill. And this included things like the typewriter, the newspaper, the camera, whatever he couldn't burn.
Right, and once he gave this evidence, divers from the FBI's underwater search and evidence response team recovered Samantha's body.
Right, so part of the interview, he did give the location of her body.
Then the next day, there is a memorial of flowers, candles, and teddy bears accumulating at the Common Grounds coffee stand. So when they're interviewing this guy and he's confessed to Samantha's murder, the detectives just knew that this was not the first time he had murdered someone.
No, he was far too organized and, just kind of cavalier about the whole thing.
Yeah. But Keyes refused to tell detectives about the details of any of his other crimes. He wanted to be promised to be put to death within a year, and he didn't want his name to be released in connection with his crimes until absolutely necessary. He was concerned or expressing concern about how his notoriety would affect his daughter's life. Alaska doesn't have a death penalty, but Keyes was told it was a possibility if he is convicted of a federal crime, so that's what he did. He confessed to the abduction and murders of Lorraine and Bill Currier of Essex, Vermont. He said he had chosen the Currier home because it fit his criteria. It had an attached garage, no cars in the driveway, no children, no dogs. So he had stayed at the Handy Suites Motel just blocks away from the Currier's home. On June 8, 2011, he walked down the street and considered several of the houses as targets. After he decided on the Currier's house, he waited to see if there were any witnesses. Then he went to the side of the house and cut the phone line. He wanted to make sure they didn't have an alarm system that would alert the police when the line was cut. So after several minutes, he was satisfied there wasn't an alarm. He found a crowbar in the garage and used it to break the window leading into their kitchen. He wore a headlamp for lighting, and he blitzed the couple. Within seconds, he was in their bedroom and he tied their hands with zip ties. Then he asked some questions about the house and about any valuables.
Yeah, he went through the house and took Lorraine's handgun and both of their cell phones. Then he forced the couple into their own car, which was parked in their garage. To try and keep them cooperating with him, he told them that they were being kidnapped for ransom, and they would be released. So he drove with them in the car to the Handy Suites Motel, where he picked up a shovel, trash bags, and 2 gallons of Drano from the trunk of his car. Then he drove to a vacant farmhouse, which he had already chosen as the site where he would murder whoever he managed to abduct that night. After he parked in back of the farmhouse, Keyes took Bill and led him into the basement through the bulkhead. He bound Bill to a chair and went back for Lorraine. But back at the car, Lorraine had gotten out of the car. She'd broken free from the zip ties, and she was trying to run when she saw him coming back. But he easily caught her and dragged her to a second-floor bedroom. I just can't imagine the terror these people must have been going through. I mean, can you imagine being asleep in your bed and having this happen?
No.
It's so terrifying.
Not in my wildest nightmares.
Just makes me want to have lots of dogs and alarms. So poor Lorraine, he tied her to a mattress with duct tape, knotted a hitch around her neck, and had her tied to that bed spread eagle. There were noises coming from the basement, and he ran down to find Bill had broken free from the chair. And he was yelling for his wife, just going crazy, worried about his wife. But Keyes grabbed a shovel and beat Bill with it. Then he went upstairs, got his gun, which had a silencer on it, and back in the basement he just cold-bloodedly shot Bill to death, actually emptying a 10-round magazine into Bill. Then he returned to Lorraine after he had killed her husband. She tried to fight him, but he raped her. Then he took her down to the basement and strangled her to death. He put the couple's bodies in trash bags, poured Drano on each of them, and covered the bags with debris, leaving them in the corner of the basement of this abandoned farmhouse. Keyes then drove the courier's car to a Lowe's parking lot, which was a few blocks from their house, and he left it there. Then he walked back to his motel to check out, returned his rental car, and went back to the courier's car. So he said his plan at this point was to head up the interstate and rob several banks that he had already staked out. But the courier's car was almost out of gas. So Keyes said he dropped off the car at the apartment building lot where it was later found. He had walked back to reclaim his rental car and drove it all the way to Bangor, Maine to visit his brother. So he really drove all over the place.
He did, and there's more. I mean, after he left Maine, he drove back to Vermont, and in Vermont he burned a suitcase filled with some of the courier's belongings. This was in one of the national forests. He drove by the courier's car and was happy to see it was closed off with crime scene tape. He then drove to New York State, tossed Lorraine's gun into a reservoir. Then he drove to Chicago and took a flight back to Alaska.
Yeah, so he always flew under his own name, but he drove these long distances, so it was really hard to make a connection.
Yeah, it's not like he got off at the Burlington airport and they could go through passenger lists.
Right. He drove thousands of miles.
Yeah.
So during these confessions, he told detectives that he had buried what he called kill kits all across the country. He had buried that kill kit near the courier's town of Essex, which he dug up in 2011 and used in that abduction. He told detectives the location of the courier's bodies in that Vermont farmhouse. But when they went there, they found that the house had been demolished and there was nothing there. The garbage bags in the basement had been taken to a landfill because nobody knew that there were human beings in there. So law enforcement began to search the biggest landfill in the state, and they really wanted to find this couple. They searched for 12 weeks, but they never did find the courier's remains. It had been, 8 months or so by the time they were doing this search?
Yeah, and who knows if he's telling them the whole truth about this.
That's true too, yes.
So that's an impossible task, and they didn't find any of the courier's remains.
No, but not for not trying.
Nope. So during his interviews, Keyes confessed to 8 murders, but he also referred to other murders. The FBI suspects that he committed up to 12 murders. And when they put together a timeline of Keyes' movements, the FBI released a list of 35 trips that he made across the country between 2004 and 2012. hopeful that law enforcement agencies would be able to match the dates with bank robberies, disappearances, and unsolved murders.
Yeah, now they suspected Keyes in a 1996 murder in Colville, Washington. Remember, he had lived there. On March 3, 1996, a 12-year-old girl with prosthetic lower legs and feet disappeared after leaving her home. So this was little Julie Harris. She had been born with a blood disorder that gave her scars and skin grafts, and she had lost her lower legs beneath the knees. But she was still very active. She had won awards in the Special Olympics, but she just left home one day and was never seen again. Over 1 month later, Julie's artificial legs were found in the Colville River. Then 1 year later, children playing near a rural road in Colville found her skeletal remains, and she was identified by her dental records. So at this time, Israel Keyes did live nearby, and he was 18 years old. But back then, no one had any reason to suspect him.
FBI also believed that Keyes murdered a 49-year-old woman named Deborah Feldman. She disappeared from her New Jersey home in April 2009. Now, her remains have not been found, but Keyes described a murder around that same time and location. In addition, the FBI also found her name on Keyes' computer, and they felt that when he was shown her picture, he showed some reaction. And he had also robbed a bank in that area 2 days after Deborah disappeared.
So that seems like something.
That sure does. Keyes said that he murdered an unidentified couple in Washington between 2001 and 2005. He refused to say if the couple was married or what their relationship to one another was, and it's unknown if the victims lived in Washington, if they were tourists, or if he had abducted them from a nearby state and taken them to Washington.
Yeah, so he was giving these confessions, but they weren't full confessions, so they haven't been solved.
Yeah, just enough to tantalize you.
Really? Yeah, he confessed to another abduction and murder of a young girl. He described her as having pale skin, that she possibly had a wealthy grandmother, and that she drove an older car. But he refused to give more details, so, what can you really get from that?
Not much detail, is there?
No, I think he was just having fun with this, sad to say. It's really gross. He also did some traveling internationally, but we don't know if he committed any homicides outside of the United States. But while he was living in New York, Keyes was close to the border with Canada, and he may have crossed into Canada multiple times. He did report making trips to Montreal, and he was hiring prostitutes there. Also, when he went to Alaska in 2007, he drove by himself all the way through Canada, so who knows what he did.
Yeah, during his multiple interviews, Keyes claimed he wanted anonymity for the sake of his daughter. Of course, his name did eventually leak out, and this made him angry and frustrated. And then from that point, when pushed for other details, names and locations, he refused to give any more.
But the really unusual thing about him was how he seemed to manage these two separate lives. This is the really scary part to me. The randomness and the fact that he seemed like a normal guy to so many people.
Yeah, the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, right?
Yeah, he was capable of seeming like a responsible parent, and he held a job and supported his daughter. And no one who knew him in his personal life saw anything that would indicate to them that he was violent. He seemed very normal. He did talk to detectives about his progression, how his urge to kill became more and more powerful. Early on, he had tried to kill people who no one would miss, but by the time he killed Samantha Koenig, he really enjoyed seeing her family suffer. He liked to see the search for her. Killing in the area where he lived had been something he hadn't done before, until Samantha. Before that, he had traveled far from home to commit crimes, as far as we know anyway. He was interviewed over 25 times in an 8-month period after his arrest. On November 30th, 2012, he finally agreed to reveal the location of some of his kill kits to detectives. But the very next day, he killed himself in his jail cell. He used a disposable razor attached to a pencil and slit his wrists. The jail superintendent really had no explanation for how he had gotten the razor. Inmates were given one plastic disposable razor to use in the shower, but they're supposed to be returned after they come out of the shower. And there's really no excuse for this to happen because he had said he wanted the death penalty, and if it wasn't given to him, he would take care of it.
Yeah, you would think he'd be under suicide watch. Maybe he was.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to cry myself to sleep that he killed himself. I'm fine with it, really.
Yeah.
I know some people feel like it was the coward's way out and he should have had to go through a trial, but I mean, really, we're just better off without him on the planet if you come down to it, in my opinion. So it was after lights out on December 1st when a corrections officer checked on Keyes. He was checking on him every 30 to 45 minutes, and he said he appeared to be asleep under a blanket. They found crumpled papers from a legal pad with him under the blanket, much of them soaked in blood, and he died without revealing where his victims' remains could be found. Now, he did write these notes that were sent to the FBI for analysis, but I'm not going to read them or go over them because I don't think he deserves that kind of attention. I don't care what he wrote. Do you?
Nope.
No, we don't give a shit. So Keyes' hours of interviews have clues about his victims, but nothing specific, really. The FBI does have all of his travel records, and he did fly using his real name, like I said, but he drove these long distances to find victims. But still, there are investigators who are continuing to try and match him to missing persons cases. But it will be really tough to do that conclusively with what we have.
It sure would be.
Yeah.
Well, it's proven to be.
Yeah, but these poor families with missing loved ones.
I know.
Just heartbreaking.
So there's a lot out there to read and watch about Israel Keyes.
Yeah, there were a few things we looked at. There was a book titled Devil in the Darkness by J.T. Hunter. There's a 2-hour special, which is fairly recent on the Oxygen Network, titled Method of a Serial Killer. There's also a 2-part special with M. William Phelps, titled Dark Minds, all about Israel Keyes. And of course, you can watch hours of his interrogations on YouTube. The FBI released a timeline and request for the public's assistance to find his victims, and you can find that also to read. I'd like to thank Allison for recommending this case. I really knew nothing about it, and it definitely is fascinating.
It is. Gruesomely fascinating.
Yeah, that's true. TCB's music was written and produced by Tristan Capel. And if you should happen to decide you're interested in getting some more TCB and giving some support to our show, we do have some good stuff coming up. So Dick's just wrapping up his research on our members-only episode for February.
Yes, this is a so-called cosmetic surgeon who was a hack in more ways than one, caused the death of at least one patient, and tried to do something bad to his wife. I'll just leave it at that.
Okay. Our commercial-free members-only episodes do come out every month, plus there's a large backlog of episodes you can listen to as soon as you join. Recent episodes include the murder of Josh Hilberling, the kidnapping of Shannon Matthews, the honored killing of Jesse Sidhu, the crimes of Robert Reldan, who was a serial rapist and murderer. And you can be a Tie Grabber member for as little as $4 a month. So in addition to getting members-only commercial-free episodes, you also get your choice of a Welcome to the Brewery gift with a handwritten thank you note. If you're interested, just go to tiegrabber.com and click on subscribe to learn more about it. Some other ways to offer your support to us are to rate us on iTunes or wherever you listen, and these ratings are very beneficial to help us get more listeners. Also, you can do some shopping on our website if you like and get pretty much anything you can think of with our logo on it. So we're going to move on to feedback now, and if you have a case suggestion or comments about a crime or even a beer, we encourage you to send us a voicemail. We have a widget on our website that's on the right side of your screen, and you can just click on that to record your message. Another way to send us a voicemail is just to record it on your phone and paste it into an email to us. Or if you're too shy for either of those, just send us an email with your comments or suggestions to truecrimebrewery@tiegrabber.com. We really do love to hear from our listeners. It's our favorite part of doing this podcast. If you've signed up for our newsletter, we did put out our first quarterly newsletter in January, and we're gathering information for our April newsletter. So I'm inviting all of you to submit your short articles, reviews of true crime books you've read, or true crime movies and documentaries you've watched. Maybe there's a crime that has affected your life, or just really change the way you see certain aspects of things. We'd love to read whatever you share with us, and we're going to share much of it with our other listeners. And we also have a contest now. It's something we're repeating from 3 years ago, and this is the beer review contest. So just call in, review a beer, and you can win some headphones, some Bluetooth earbuds, actually. Now, we're not judging audio quality. We're going to judge it on personality, detail, and the overall charm of your review. So the prize is really good. It's some great Bluetooth earbuds, and we're going to run this contest for 2 to 3 months, depending on how much we get for contributions and entries.
Exactly.
Yep. Okay. Well, let's go on to feedback.
Okay, here we go.
So let's start with a voicemail.
Yeah, you might have noticed I only have a short feedback section this time. I got lazy.
Okay, this is from Dawn.
Hi, Dick and Jill. I just wanted to call and say how much I love your podcast, and I wanted to call with a suggestion for a story. My husband, for a brief period, worked with an air traffic controller named Dave Larson, Larsen, and on the 3rd anniversary of his divorce here in Wisconsin, he beat up his wife with a baseball bat and put her in a cold storage unit and left her there, where she ended up, after much searching, being found. And she lost all the toes on her feet while she was stuck in a bin in the storage unit. So it's a really riveting story. The Chicago Tribune has a great link if you want to look for it there. And I forget how many days she was lost, but it's Dave Larsen, Larsen, and his wife is Terry Gendusa Nikolai, Teri, Gendusa, Jendusa, Nikolai, Nikolai. And the beer I would like to suggest is a fabulous one, brewed here in Wisconsin, and it is from Point Brewery, and it is the Snow Pilot Pistachio Nut Brown Ale, and it's delicious. So keep up the great work. I love, love, love your show and listen all the time. Thank you.
Thanks, Dawn. That case sounds familiar to me, so I'm definitely going to look that up.
Yeah, we have to look at that. I think fortunately the wife or ex-wife survived, minus a few toes, but she didn't die. Which is
but just, imagine
good.
The horror of that.
Well, no kidding. First you're beaten nearly to death with a baseball bat, and then you're stuffed into some little locker type thing.
Yeah, so he definitely wanted her to die.
He definitely did. But
what about the beer?
It sounds interesting. I don't think I ever had a pistachio beer.
No, I love pistachios.
Yeah, so we'll check that out. And I'd also thank Dawn. She's one of the very few people that spelled names out for me. Because sometimes it's very difficult to figure out who's being talked about. But with the spellings, I got it exactly. So thanks for doing that, Dawn. I appreciate it.
Yeah, that was thoughtful. Very thoughtful. So let's read these emails. You want to do the first one?
I got 2 emails for you, okay?
Okay.
So this is from Emily, the first one. She has a case suggestion. And Emily says, I've no real hope that you'll see my email, as I'm sure you receive a flood of them.
Oh, we read all the emails, Emily. We would never miss one.
We do. And she's suggesting a case that she thinks we'll enjoy. I think you would do a fantastic job presenting the case of Ann and Bill Stout of Montana. Ann and Bill were struggling to deal with a stalker who was a jilted ex with whom Bill had a brief affair when the marriage was on the rocks. Harassment escalated and Bill wound up dead. Now, the ex-lover, her name was Barbara, was the obvious suspect, as you can probably guess. But as police dug in, they realized all was not as it seemed. Great big twist to the story that I didn't see coming the first time I watched the Paul Wazan documentary about it. Anyway, it's a case that's never left my mind, and I think you do a wonderful job telling the story. It's a very interesting story, and I'm not going to give away the big denouement, so I'll leave it at that. But it's an interesting story.
Okay, I don't believe we have a Montana case ever that I can recall.
No, so we might want to look into that, right?
Yes, and Paula Zahn, I have all of her shows on my Amazon True Crime subscription. Paula Zahn is a big part of that, so lots of episodes of Paula. Did you know that there are several seasons of Paula Zahn? I mean, like at least 8?
No, it's just, she's one of those people that you always see on TV, so I never really think about how long she's been around.
No, but quite a while. Her show, which you wouldn't think, it's just been on for years and years.
Yeah.
Yeah, so interesting. Okay, well, thanks a lot, Emily.
There we go. And you get the last one. This is from your friend Cindy.
Yes, friend of the show, Cindy, has a case suggestion, and this is for the murder of Ken Rex McElroy. There's a book in broad daylight and a movie also by the same name. McElroy was like a modern-day Western villain who wreaked havoc on Skidmore, Missouri. Ken McElroy was the town bully of Skidmore, Missouri, with several episodes of assault, statutory rape, burglary, cattle rustling, etc., not well liked. And he was shot to death while sitting in his truck with his wife one night, and he was shot with 2 different weapons in front of a crowd of 30 to 40 people. But no one's been charged because I guess no one cares enough to say who did it. Someone must know.
He was so universally hated in that town that they had probably a party after he was dead, and they certainly weren't going to rat out the people that shot him.
That's amazing.
It is.
There's usually someone who loves somebody, no matter how bad they are. They usually have one person who cares.
Not Ken. Plus, the interesting thing to me is that his wife was sitting in the truck with him, and she didn't say anything.
Oh, boy. Okay.
So we'll have to look for that.
Maybe she hired someone to do it. Who knows?
Careful there.
Okay. Well, that was a nice little feedback segment. Thanks for contributing that, Dick. And thank you, Emily, Cindy, and Dawn.
Good job.
Yeah. So we'll see everyone at the quiet end next week.
Next week. Be there.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.